Okay, I've got a message saying now streaming live. So welcome everyone to the first Parks meeting under this new regime. We have every member except for Councillor Ewan. So would someone like, we've got no leave of absence unless Belinda, have we got any leave of absences or apologies?
No, Chair.
None, right. I think I heard you say none there. So if someone needs to co-opt, the next person on the list would be the Lord Mayor. Could someone co-opt the Lord Mayor?
So moved, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Deputy. I put that. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. So welcome aboard, Lord Mayor. The confirmation of minutes is the next item, agenda item 2. So the only minutes that we have here is the 12th of March, which seems like half a lifetime ago. Could someone move confirmation of minutes?
Happy to move those.
Thank you. It was Alderman Thomas. Now, Councillor Ewan has welcome Councillor Ewan. Because we haven't started any of the official agenda items, you are a member, and so the Lord Mayor won't be a voting member of the committee. That's okay with you?
That's totally fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So I put the motion, the confirmation of minutes. If there's anyone against it, say it. Otherwise, we'll just move on because it's a procedural motion. Okay, there's no one against that. I declare the motion carried. Consideration of supplementary items. There is no supplementary items, so we'll move on. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest, which is item 4. Anyone has a conflict of interest or pecuniary interest? Being none, we move on. Transfer of agenda items. Anyone wish to transfer agenda items? In your silence, I say no. Now we go to our first report, which is report 6, 6.1, the Kenani Mount Wellington Wall Saddle Visitor Hub feasibility study update. I think we'll start off with this item by asking the director, Mr. Doyle, to just give us a bit of an introduction to the item before we open it for discussion. Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Just before you start, Glenn, don't wish to be too selfish, I guess, but from my perspective, I wasn't around back when this was initially done. So if you could provide maybe a little bit of a history for me, just I guess bearing in mind I find myself at a disadvantage, if you like, because I wasn't here for the previous 2 years. So that's all.
Yes,
that's okay.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Councillor Coates. We'll move on to the director.
Thanks, Chairman. And yes, Councillor Coates, happy to do that. I guess the story on this one really starts well over 20 years ago, because there's been consideration by the council.
Not necessarily that far back.
Well, it's actually been going for well over that long because council has been thinking about improved visitor facilities on the mountain for in excess of 20 years. I guess it's revved up more recently though, when we did have a live planning permit by private enterprise at the Springs. That didn't eventuate. We then had some other interest from other private entrepreneurs, and we did a whole lot of work with them, and that went nowhere again. And we then had a resolution of council that said, okay, council staff, please get in and do some work to determine the feasibility of establishing a visitor centre at the Springs. And there was a whole lot of work done by council staff. Now, that culminated in a report that was presented to council in September of last year. And essentially that identified that there were 4 significant barriers to the development of a visitor centre at the Springs. And those 4 were the need for a deep engagement with the Aboriginal community, which could have been achieved, a need to address fire issues which could have been achieved but difficult, a need to ensure that there was adequate services, and that is particularly water and sewerage, again, could have been achieved but expensive. But the fourth one was the identification that parking and traffic access and issues were restricted and were incredibly difficult to resolve. The recommendation of staff as a result of those were not to proceed any further with the investigations of this visitor centre at the Springs, and council accepted that. Now, in preparing the report to council, we identified that not only are there traffic management issues associated with any proposed development at the Springs, there's also ongoing traffic management issues on the Pinnacle Road every day. The number of visitors are increasing, and that's well documented in the papers that have been distributed with the agenda. The number of vehicles, the size of the vehicles, the number of international drivers have all led to congestion, limited parking, but also there's a lower appetite, I guess, for risk, and therefore we've been increasingly closing the road based on weather forecasts. Lots of times we're criticised for closing the road when there is no snow, but there is often black ice, which makes it incredibly difficult to drive and very dangerous. But it does cause traffic congestion all around the Ferntree area. Now, in preparing the report for council in September last year, we said, isn't it a shame we haven't got a large piece of land somewhere near Ferntree that could be used as a car park? Now, one of the staff said to me, well, actually we do. We have an old quarry at Ridgeway. Maybe that's worth a thought. So as part of the report that was presented, effectively killing off consideration of the Springs Visitor Centre was a suggestion to council that they might like to do some sort of analysis of this land ownership at Ridgeway to determine its capability to offer a solution. Council agreed with that proposal, and the site analysis is what's before you tonight. Now, essentially, it identifies that the council-owned land has the capacity and capability to offer a whole range of things. There's been lots of public debate about a visitor centre, where in fact a visitor centre is only one element of what that site could offer. And there's many that would argue, given that COVID-19 has had an impact on not only visitor numbers reducing, but has also put more people online looking for information and bookings and so forth, and other councils are closing visitor centres, that it might be the last thing that we'd think about developing or opening. But importantly, the assessment identifies that the site could offer 285 car spaces. It could provide an opportunity for a bus terminus. It could be a spot for a cafe. It could provide a toilet. It could provide change rooms for those that are using the mountain bike facilities. In the first brush, you look at Hall Saddle and think, well, that's well away from the mountain. But actually looking at it, it's adjacent to the mountain and might be, as the consultants have found, ideally located as a base camp, and it's certainly well connected in terms of our recreational walking network and in good proximity to Ferntree. So the report that's before you tonight suggests that that site does have potential and is worth doing some more work on. Now, the report is very clear. The council has no money to spend in terms of capital works on this site. There was an original budget last September allocated of $100,000, of which we have 40,000 left, and it is that 40,000 that would be used to fund the work that's recommended in the report tonight. And that report, the work that's suggested is essentially some more design work, some consultation, and really firming up some of these concepts. But it's really coming back to council and saying, okay, well, we did what you asked. We did the assessment of the site. Would you like us to do any more? Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions, but hopefully that sort of introduces the issue for you.
Thank you very much. That was pretty well done from such a big report. Thank you. I've just got word from our legal officer that to be recorded as present at this meeting, you'll need to turn on, this is the elected members, turn on your camera so we can see, the officers can see you. So if you could turn on, yes, Councillor Dudda. So thank you, Councillor Harvey. Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. And Councillor Ewan's there. So probably the only person that should be turning on their camera, if you're there, Lord Mayor, if you want to be recorded as being present at this meeting, you need to turn on your camera. Okay, we'll move on. So I open, now the way we do it, because we've got a good attendance of other elected members tonight, I think we'll give the committee committee members first bite of the cherry for questions, and then we will go on to other members. So could we start off with the Deputy Lord Mayor? Have you got any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, for the report, and obviously it's done by consultants, but it's quite thorough. The vote when we did decide to have this consideration last year, what was the vote then, either through you, Chairman, to Mr. Doyle or to the General Manager?
Did you hear that question, Director?
I'm not sure if the General Manager wants to take it or not. My understanding was that it was 10 votes to 2 that the motion was carried, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. And a subsequent question. The report's written just almost pre-COVID, and obviously we're going on figures for, you know, like a standard growth in international and other visitors. Have you looked at any sort of other modelling? And as a subsequent question, I'm interested in the economic viability for such a project.
Director?
Chairman, firstly, the report is dated the 17th of March. So we had a responsibility to report back to you in February this year, and we didn't make that. The report wasn't ready until March. And so all of the information in the report is absolutely pre-COVID. And no, we haven't asked for any subsequent modelling because we didn't know what elements of this you might be interested in pursuing. Certainly, as I've alluded to, I'd anticipate COVID's going to have some impacts, both in an immediate reduction in visitor numbers, and who knows how long it will take for those visitor numbers to get back to where they were and what the new projections will be. And secondly, what impact COVID will have on visitor centres in particular, given that, you know, lots of people now are online, and I understand that's how of other existing visitor centres. So really, Deputy Lord Mayor, tonight would be an opportunity for Council to give us direction as to what elements they may or may not be interested in, and we can do more modelling on that or more stakeholder engagement on that. But these are all pre-COVID and no updates taking account of.
Thank you for that, Director. Perhaps Alderman Thomas.
Look, thanks, Chair. Look, I'll just give advice that, or notice that I'm likely to move later on in the meeting for a procedural motion for a deferral based on the fact that the report and the time we're in is so dramatically different. Look, I had a chance to have a look at both sites yesterday with John Fisher, took me through, and quite clearly for me, there's quite a possibility that if you accept that people aren't going to simply say we don't want to use, we won't even attempt to use parks at the Pinnacle and the 60 or 70 car parks at the Springs, then to my mind, over a period of time, we'd need to look at some form of potentially, if we're going to have a Hall Saddle car park, and clearly and it's a very big if, we're going to get those numbers again within the next year or two, we'd be looking at a premium, or potentially looking at a premium parking cost at the Springs. So you might say, if you're going to be there, as I understand people are there for more than 2 or 3 hours in the norm, you might have a day park cost even $70, but you might have nothing at Hall Saddle and a free shuttle going up. So you're actually maximising, you're not stopping people going to the Springs, but you're acting through the fee structure, you're providing a disincentive to have a rush of people trying to overwhelm that site. And clearly, the Hall Saddle is a much more preferable site, but we know the people's dependence on cars, and we know people's dependence on wanting to be as close to the action as possible, particularly in places like Tasmania. So I think the only way ultimately is that there'll be some form of premium cost potentially at the Pinnacle, and a premium cost at the Springs, and a very reasonable situation applying at Hall Saddle. But unless we bring in something like the Sydney hotel stacking of cars, we're certainly not going to cover the need at the Springs alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Thomas. If we now move on to if Councillor Ewan would like to make any comments. I think you need to be unmuted.
The spacebar thing wasn't working as it should be. Anyway, thank you. I guess for me, I'm quite happy with the report, and I think the timing does suck. I do think, given that it came pre-COVID, we do need to do, I guess, a bit more economic feasibility stuff. And I'm interested to know whether we've explored, or we could explore, commercial opportunities for the site as well.
Thank you. Would you like to make a comment, Director?
Certainly, Chairman, as part of the site analysis, the consultants have identified that there is the potential for some commercial development if that was something Council wanted to pursue. We've done nothing more than had that identified as part of the site assessment, and there's absolutely no identification as the type of business that might be operated there. But if Council decided that it wished to pursue one aspect of the development and that involved some sort of commerciality, then we could go through an expression of interest or whatever to help fund that, if that was the desire of Council.
Thank you, Director. Now we move on to Councillor Sherlock. Would you like to make any comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I was just about to ask about that funding, because I noticed that 4.21, the report mentions about leveraging broader economic benefits, and I just wondered if you could explain or go into detail a bit more what that actually looked like, practically speaking.
Director.
Again, Chairman, I remind committee that this report was prepared prior to COVID-19. And so the consultants, in doing the assessment that they did, identified the potential for this site to enhance, I guess, the visitor experience, not only to the mountain, but also our open space network, and saw this infrastructure as aiding the tourism sector in the city more generally. But they are high-level statements. There are no specifics, because there is no specific business, if you like, identified on the site, other than the broad-scale site analysis, which is detailed in the report that's been provided to you this evening. And, you know, I stress again, if council has an appetite to progress any of these elements, then we do need to revisit them in a post-COVID-19 environment. The only thing I would say, Chairman, if you'll permit me, is that I was on the mountain myself on Monday, and at lunchtime on Monday, all the car spaces at the Springs were taken, as were the car spaces at the Chalet, and there were very few spots left at the Pinnacle. Now, that is now when there are no interstate or overseas visitors. So I urge committee to think about this primarily as a car park. You know, the suggestions, the analysis that's before you identifies the need for in the order of 500 car spaces to serve the mountain. At the moment, we've got around 200 available to us. So, you know, the 70 at the Springs, I think, as Alderman Thomas talked about, and you know, 100 odd scattered elsewhere. So you know, the car parking element is undoubtedly the highest importance, and seems to be a consistent importance irrespective of COVID.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Now, the Lord Mayor has indicated that she is present, but she can't, because she's in transit, she can't turn on her video. But I will ask if the Lord Mayor is still there. Would you like to make any comments? I'll go through in order of precedence from now on. Lord Mayor?
Oh, hi, Jeff. No, I'm just about to start. Oh, sorry, Alderman Briscoe. So I'm just about to start another meeting. So I won't be able to, and I'm not able to put my video on either. So I'm sorry, but I've been interested to hear the discussion so far, and good luck with the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So we'll move on to the next one on our list of seniority is Councillor Harvey. Would you like to make any comments or questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I popped up the other day and there were cars parked all over the place. So there's a real need for more car parking on the mountain. And I've visited the whole saddle site a couple of times and wandered around there and, you know, sat there for a bit and stared at the vistas. And I think it's a sensible site to turn into a car park, and potentially somewhere where people could drop their cars and get picked up by, you know, shuttle buses, or start their walk, start their bike ride. So I think that the potential at Hall Saddle is really, really strong, and it could be a really successful hub, more so I think than the Springs, which, as we've said, is limited by the amount of parking. So as the report said, you'd still have cars that could, you know, go to the Pinnacle potentially, cars that could go to the Springs potentially. And then once the sign lights up and says no more cars, then everyone has to go to the Hall Saddle and take the alternatives to get up to the mountain. And I think the local community would also benefit from having a cafe there, because there's very limited opportunities in Ferntree other than the tavern. So to have something available for walkers that use the pipeline track, I think's got a lot of merit.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. My next list, Alderman Barakis, have you got any comments?
I do, Chair. Thank you. Got a few questions first. It was established, I think, when I was coming in, and apologies for being late, that all the feasibility studies and projections were based on pre-COVID. So that was going to be one of my questions, but I'll accept that. I suppose one of the other one is the parking that's going to be existing in Horse Saddle going to affect people's ability at any point to drive up to the top of the mountain? I may have missed that at the beginning, so correct me if I'm doubling over stuff.
Director?
Chairman, the intention, if council wished to proceed with the Horse Saddle site, would be to promote the availability of the car park prior to getting to Pinnacle Road. What we find at the moment, particularly when we need to close the road, is that as much as we put variable messaging all the way along the road saying Pinnacle Road is closed, we end up with cars all over the place because people drive awaiting the gates to open. And so what we would operationally do is direct people to the Hall Saddle car park. Now, particularly larger vehicles, particularly those that might be towing caravans, because certainly lots of people try and tow caravans along Pinnacle Road. Those in RVs, we get regular RV vehicles trying to get up there. We haven't gone to a space where we say we're going to restrict a certain vehicle sort or anything else. But what we do know is we do not have enough car parking on the mountain, and we haven't been able to find anywhere else on the mountain to provide the additional spaces. Now, if in the future council decided that it wanted to run a shuttle bus and restrict a certain type of vehicle or put in load restrictions or load limit restrictions or whatever, it could. But it's at the moment, we're simply saying we've undertaken a site assessment and it's identified that there is the capacity for this site to have 285 car spaces.
Yep. And I suppose following up on that, I noticed in your report, and you did say that there's no specifics on there yet, but there is the talks of cafes and stuff like that. So I suppose, does part of the business model revolve around the, our commercial tenancy aspect of it? And I imagine if there is a commercial tenancy, whether it be a cafe or a restaurant or whatever it is, that'd be something that we're leasing to a private business, I suppose, or would it be something that we're engaging in directly?
Director.
Chairman, Alderman Barakis is probably 2 years in front of where we are. The report commissioned was to do an assessment of the capability of the site. And their assessment has identified that if council wanted to, there is the opportunity for there to be a cafe, there is the opportunity for there to be other commercial operation, but there's no suggestion at this stage we do it. If council wanted to do it, then you could look at how you were going to do it. So if you said, okay, well, look, yes, we want to do this, off you go, director, go and do a business plan and decide whether we should borrow the money and have a tenancy that we lease it out, whether we go for an expression of interest, whether we run it ourselves and do all of that. But none of that analysis has been done, because all we've done at this stage is identified whether the site had the capability of doing it. And I think what the consultants have said is, if you've got a site that's going to have 285 car spaces and some sort of bus terminus, there's a fair chance you need a toilet. And if you've got a toilet and you've got that big car park and catchment of people, then there is an opportunity to put in a cafe if you want to. Now, if you did want to, you'd have to think about how you operate it. But we are certainly nowhere near that spot yet. Chairman, while I've got the mic on, to correct some information I gave to the Deputy Lord Mayor, the vote in September was actually 8-2, not 10-2, in terms of the earlier council resolution.
Thank you, Director. Now, because of the time, I wonder, Alderman Barakis, if I could just move on and just ask Councillor Dutta and Councillor Coates, and then we'll come back for second and third.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to have a second bite after. That's fair.
So we move on to Councillor Dutta.
I just make one observation. It was stated that we have about $40,000 left. In the current financial climate and situation, would it be not prudent not to go down this path at this stage, but to use that money in operations?
Director, I know that's a judgment call, but I'll ask you anyway.
Look, I understand, Chairman, that's where Alderman Thomas is coming from. And yes, Councillor Dutta, that's absolutely a consideration for committee. I guess that's why I was anxious to get this report to you, so you can give me some direction. Do you want me to do any more work and spend any more money? Or do you want me to hold off? Or do you want me to do nothing else again? I'm in your hands, but I do need to say to you that if you want me to do some more work, then I will need to spend some of that money. I can assure you that if we don't spend it on this particular job, we have a number of other places we could use it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director. if I move on to Councillor Coates, and then I'll probably be asking for a motion. Councillor Coates, got any comments or any questions?
Yeah, look, just slight little bit of feedback, I guess, and I guess I'm fresh eyes in this sense. I mean, thank you for the work that's been done. It's good. I mean, if it highlights what everyone knows, which is that there are restrictions on access to the top of the mountain. Obviously, parking, traffic is an issue, and that'll be something that who knows in the post-COVID world, but I imagine will come up again. I guess the one question I had as part of this was any feedback sought from. I mean, I guess I'm curious. We've got obviously I think it's Lost Freight Cafe up there, but also the Fern Tree Tavern. Has there been any instances in the past where they've sought to expand, they've sort of approached and looked and said, look, we know there's people trying to get up. We're happy to have them park outside our business and come in and use it. Has any sort of activity happened in the past with those businesses and sites looking to expand and provide more services, or is this sort of very much independently of those businesses?
Director, yeah, I know it's a bit of a speculation, but if you'd like to answer that or make comments about that.
Briefly, Chairman, certainly there's been no discussions with either of those operators in respect to this report because we wanted to get your direction in the first instance. We do work very closely with Lost Freight and we are helping them right at the moment because they're looking to expand, but one of their constraints is the parking availability at the Springs, undoubtedly. And we've certainly had lots of conversations with the Fern Tree Tavern as we redevelop the park directly across the road. And if council had any interest in this particular concept, I would have been very interested to see what Fern Tree Tavern thought about it. But Councillor Coates, that's really as far as it's gone at the moment.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look, at this stage, I'm going to ask for a motion, whether it's the officer's recommendation. And I know Alderman Barakis is another question, but I think if we have a motion now, then I think Alderman Thomas has a motion. Over to you, Alderman Thomas. You'll need to turn on your mic.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I guess there's no doubt that the site, the Springs site and the Pinnacle site are under considerable pressure. There's absolutely no doubt that the Hall Saddle proposal does have some value, but we do own the Hall Saddle site. It's not as though we have to race through this. We've got a $40,000 amount, which, as someone pointed out to me today, is probably half or more than half of a council salary, council officer salary. I think at the end of the day, there's also, although we can look for funding somewhere, and clearly this is not just the city's value having a mountain that people can access. It's a huge tourism attraction. But I think waiting until after the estimates have been done, which are very close to us, and leaving this to be proceeded with by, say, by the end of the calendar year, and listening to the director who's under significant budgetary pressure, I'd like to test the committee's support in terms of a procedural motion for deferral only until the end of this calendar year. So I'll put that, Chair. I'll need a seconder, of course.
You're on mute, Jeff. I can see you talking.
I'll accept that. We don't need a seconder in a committee meeting, I don't believe. So, look, it's a procedural motion which I'll put straight away. And I know, Alderman Barakis, forgive me, I know you had a question, but if it fails, we can go on. But anyway, I'll put that, the procedural motion. So, of deferring until the end of this calendar year. I will ask each member to respond A or no. So, so Alderman Thomas?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Ewan?
No.
Councillor Sherlock? Answer yes. Sorry?
No.
No. Who have I missed out? Deputy Lord Mayor, I'm sorry about that. I jumped over you.
That's all right, Chair. No.
No. Okay, and I would vote yes for a deferral. If my numbers are correct, it's 3-2, and the motion is lost. The motion is lost.
Chairman, I'm happy to move the motion as it is on the books, and also just taking into account what Councillor Ewan has suggested with an economically viable model as part of that. If that reflects what you want to add, Councillor Ewan.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now Alderman Barakis, I'll give you a go of
Lord Chairman, can I speak to,
sorry,
my motion, please?
Okay, yes.
Chairman, I think this, whilst we are in this post-COVID world, we also have plenty of opportunity to make the most of what is an incredibly underutilised part of the mountain. To me, this the feasibility study and the work that's already been done suggests that there are many positives with traffic control, easier to ride from the city as well to the site. I mean, it's a magnificent site. I've been up with Mr. Fisher as well, and the views to the pinnacle is fantastic. So I think that there's real opportunity, and part of me thinks that if we're looking at some sort of economic model, we have just been bitten very hard so far during this COVID crisis with income streams. And we may well find that we need to consider all sorts of income streams and to diversify our income streams. You're right, Alderman Barakis.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise I wasn't muted.
It's okay. But this may well be an opportunity as the gateway to the mountain. The examples in the report, I think, were testament to how well this can work. So I'm all in favour of this, and I hope that the rest of the committee can support this motion.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Now, Alderman Barakis, so I did put off your question, but have you got a quick question?
I suppose now that we speak about the idea of, it's more of a statement now, but now that we speak of the idea of using this as an income stream and potentially commercialising it, which is one of the questions I was getting to earlier. I suppose one of the things, and look, I do think it is quite concerning that the committee has just voted not to defer this, especially considering the fact that we're now basing it off a feasibility study that's out of date. I thought the appropriate thing to do and the responsible thing to do would have been to put this off at least until we have some more up-to-date figures. But the reality is the council's taken a pretty significant budgetary hit. We don't know what the outlook looks like, or we don't have any projections of what the tourism numbers are going to look like in the future. I know it was said that the mountain was quite full over the weekend, on Monday, but I think that's because part of the reason for that is it's been closed up until the weekend. So I'm not sure if that high demand is necessarily going to be something that continues on in the long term. But look, I think we've got, on one hand, we've got talks of and demands for, and people screaming for car parking on one side of the city, which people on the council are vehemently opposing. And now we're talking about putting car parks in a visitor centre at the bottom of the mountain, which it does seem like a strange turn of priorities, and especially when the council was talking about possibly using this as an income stream and having a commercial interest in this. My concern is, and it's a concern that's going to be raised by members of the public, it's already been raised with me, is if we've got an application that we're going to be determining very soon, and I'm not convinced that this isn't without its own political implications as well. But there's there's a development application that has its own commercial interests coming up very, very soon. Obviously, we're talking about the elephant in the room, which is the cable car. Now, if this goes ahead and we have a commercial interest in what's happening here, does the council have a serious issue as far as making a development application decision based on something where it has a commercial interest that may be affected by the approval or refusal of an item?
I'm sorry to interrupt you there,
Yep.
Alderman Barakis. We can't talk about a current proposal that's before council. So I wonder if you just restrict your comments to
Sure.
this proposal. I think we're all aware of what you're saying,
Sure.
but just to keep it that we are going to make decisions.
We are. Look. Okay. Look. I'll move away from that then. We have limited money to spend as a council, and I acknowledge that part of the money that we're seeking to use if we do go ahead on this would be seeking funding from state or federal bodies. But is the message that we really want to send to the community that this is a more important or a higher priority use of funds than any of the projects that we could be doing to reduce congestion or improve the city amenity of people living in the city? I'm really, really not convinced it's a good idea at all. And I think it's an appalling decision that we're not even willing to defer this to try and get some better figures on this. I think this is really, really not a good step for us as a council. I think we've got the real serious risk of this becoming probably the largest white elephant the council's ever had in its history. Like, we have to I think it's something that we should take very seriously, because we do have a responsibility, because we are using ratepayers' money here. I think a deferral was the smart thing to do. I commend Alderman Thomas for moving that motion, and I think it's pretty concerning that this wasn't supported.
Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Now, in the interest of time, because the agenda, there's quite a few other agenda items, and I know at least one committee member has to leave shortly. My view quickly is that I do support the proposal. I did support the deferral so we have a better idea of our finances, but I will be supporting the motion by the deputy tonight. But if there is a deferral at council, I may be supporting that. But look, for the sake of putting on record that I support the project as a car park, and one way to consider the congestion on the mountain with cars and so on, as was outlined by the director, I will be supporting the motion tonight, but I also reserve my right, if there's a deferral motion at council for further information or for time, I'll be supporting that. Okay, I intend, unless anyone's got an objection, I intend to put the motion that's been moved by the deputy. So no objection. So I ask each member to respond A or no. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Aye, Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Thomas.
Aye.
Thank you. Councillor Ewan.
Yes.
Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
And I vote yes too. So I declare the vote carried. 5-0. Okay, so we move on to the next item. If you just give me a moment, I'll just open my agenda papers. So the next item is item 6.2. It's basically a memorandum because a couple of community groups have approached us, and it's one of those things that's basically been put on the agenda to see whether the committee wishes it to have a report written. So would someone like to move the recommendation that the council officers or city officers provide further information to the committee? Who was that? Sorry.
That was me.
Oh, sorry. Good. Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Do we need to discuss this? Okay.
Just a question. Sorry, Chair. Just a question before we jump ahead. With the recommendation for the city officers to provide further information to the committee, is that going to come at a cost to council for them to provide such a report, or?
Good question. Councillor Doyle, Director Doyle.
The report, Chairman, would be prepared in-house. There may be the need for us to secure a legal opinion in terms of the city's ability to nominate a property over or a park over which it only has part ownership under the Police Offences Act. So there could be a cost associated with that. How much that would be, I'm not sure.
Oh, thank you, because I think this is something that's absurd for us to even be considering, and even more absurd for us to be spending money on, frankly. But I think it's good to know that there is actually whether there is actually a cost attached to this.
Thank you. Look, I intend to put the motion unless anyone else has any comments, but basically we haven't got information in front of us anyway to make a decision. So essentially a short report will come back to us.
Chairman, I have a question before you put the motion.
Oh, thank you.
Chairman, is this part of our business, considering liquor, or not necessarily liquor licences, but dry zones? And is there benefit to the community if we were to consider this?
Again, I think that would be a subject of a report, but look, I asked the Director to answer that.
Well, I mean, that's the issue, Chairman, is that for a park to be declared to be alcohol-free, it has to be nominated in the regulations associated with the Police Offences Act. And so the staff can provide advice in terms of the technical process that council needs to go through and provide, I guess, some advice from an officer viewpoint on the merits or otherwise of that decision. But at the end of the day, that it will be an elected member call. If it is legally possible for council to make the nomination, then it'll be an elected member call as to whether you wish to proceed with that based on your assessment of the social implications.
Thank you.
Good. Look, considering we've got quite a few other items, and this isn't an item that's got qualified advice, I intend to put the motion that's been moved. So I will ask each member to respond aye or nay. The Deputy Lord Mayor.
Aye, Chairman.
Alderman Thomas.
Aye.
Councillor Ewan.
Aye.
Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
Thank you. I vote aye as well. Thank you. So I declare the motion is carried. 5-0. So we move on to item 6.3. This is a pretty standard request for an extension of the lease of the Sandy Bay Sailing Club.
I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Thomas. Is there any further discussion? It's a fairly standard request. Any comments? So I intend to put that. The Deputy Lord Mayor.
Aye.
Alderman Thomas.
Aye.
Councillor Ewan.
Aye.
Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So I declare the vote is carried. So we move on to the next one, which is similar. It's the item 6.4, the Derwent City Bowls Club. Again, it's a lease renewal. Would someone like to move that?
I'll move that, thanks.
That's Councillor Ewan, was it?
Yep.
Good, thank you. Any discussion? I intend to put that. Deputy Lord Mayor, how do you intend to vote?
Aye, Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Thomas.
Aye.
Councillor Ewan.
Yes.
Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
I vote yes as well. So I will declare the vote that the motion carried. Committee status report. Could someone like that, which is item 7? I beg your pardon, I've jumped one item. Item 6.5, which is just a memorandum indicating that each of our city playgrounds, barbecues and sports ground related hire all have COVID-19 safe plans. Would someone like to move that?
So moved, Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy. It's pretty obvious what the motion's about. I intend to, unless anyone's got any comments, I intend to put the motion. I'll ask each member to vote. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Aye, Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Thomas. Aye.
Yes.
Right.
Aye.
Councillor Ewan.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So I declare the motion carried. So item 9, questions without notice. Anyone's got questions without notice?
Sorry, Chair, we missed 7.1.
I missed 7.1. What? What did I have missed? Sorry.
The status report, Chair.
I jumped one, have I? Right. Okay. Would someone like to move that one, which is item?
So move, Chair.
Thank you. That was Councillor Sherlock.
Yes.
Okay. Received. So I'll put that. Deputy Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
Aye, Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Thomas.
Aye.
Thank you. Councillor Ewan.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Sherlock.
Aye.
Thank you. And I vote aye as well. So the motion's carried 5-0. So now we move with questions without notice. And thank you, Belinda, for pointing out I jumped one there. Questions without notice. Anyone got any questions without notice?
Sorry, Chair, we've missed responses to questions without notice. Number 8.
Well, it's funny, until now I haven't relied on paper agendas until tonight. So I've had it on the screen, but anyway, I've missed item 8.1. Someone like to move that?
So move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Look, can I just, unless there is a, does anyone intend to vote against the motion? Okay, I declare the motion carried. Now, finally, questions without notice. Anyone got questions without notice?
I've got one.
Who's that one? Sorry. Who's that?
Councillor Ewan?
Oh, sorry. Good. Thanks, Councillor Ewan.
Yes, I'm just wondering if the director could please advise us of the cost to council of maintaining Kunanyi.
Did you hear that, Director?
I can, Chairman. I'll take that question on notice. It is in the order of $2 million per year, but I will provide a breakdown of operational and capital costs over the last few years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions without notice? Being no further questions without notice, can we have a motion to close this meeting and move to the
I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Thomas. If there's no anyone intend to vote against that motion? If there's no one, I will declare the vote carried, and this meeting is closed, and we'll resume in a moment with the closed when we have confirmation that the YouTube streaming has stopped. So Craig, has the YouTube video stopped?